Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is part 15 in a 20-part series I am doing covering fan favorite, important, or just plain cool successor chapters in order of the legions, giving more of an in-depth knowledge of them as well as my opinions. Do you need to have seen the other parts to understand this one? No, but if you don't, I'll release an Arthur my Dune Scuttler into your house, and it's going to do absolutely nothing except stick to your ceiling and stare at you the whole time. And if you don't subscribe, well, then, Mr. President, I regret to inform you that there has been a second bug. Veiled threats aside, let's get into the 15th Legion, the 15th chapter, and the reason why I can't talk about Magnus in live streams anymore. Because I may or may not have taken things a bit too far in taking the piss out of him in several different settings. Well, I totally did. I think there was even a restraining order involved at some point, but whatever. So today we are going to be covering probably the most important successor of the Thousand Sons, though mostly we are going to be covering the Chaos Lord and leader of that group, Ahriman. Which means, yes, we are going to be covering the Prodigal Sons and their misdeeds, where they started, where they formed, and where they came from, as well as where they're going. They are one of those warband/chapters that exists with an express purpose in mind. That purpose is usually to just accomplish some especially arcane task, and in this case, quite literally. But we will get there. Before we do, let's just have a quick word from our sponsor. By my account, this video goes live the day I get back from my trip to Adepticon. And you know what I've learned from all my travels to all these Warhammer events is they are incredibly tiresome. Well, at least the traveling aspect. There's only so much time I can spend conscious playing Monster Hunter on my Switch in the Toronto airport before I realized I hadn't slept in over 26 hours, and my next connection flight to get back to where I'm from is an hour off. So, in order to keep myself awake, alert, and not missing my flight so I don't end up stranded in the desolate hellscape that is modern-day Toronto, I pop 3 scoops of Gamer Supps into my all-shaker cup, give it the old fork in the garbage disposal level shakedown, and boom! And I am now able to be consciously aware of my situation well enough so that I can get on the flight and then pass out before I get home. It's very useful to have on the go, and considering it's a lot easier to transport than the majority of energy drinks out there, I'd suggest picking up some Gamer Supps. So, if you ever need an extra boost in energy, focus, or what have you, or just want some kind of tasty juice to kind of make your water a little bit better, then I suggest picking up a tub of something like Nuclear Bombsicle. It's pretty tasty, very sweet, suspiciously yellow, and less than 1 calorie per serving. Use my code BONEZONE at checkout when you do pick up a tub from the website, or click my link in the description to get 10% off. You'd be supporting the channel as well as getting yourself something cheaper and better than pretty much every energy drink on the market. Thanks again to Gamer Supps for supporting my channel. And let's get back to the, wizards? Yeah. During the early days of the Great Crusade, there was quite a lot of interesting characters popping up that would live on to the modern day, and Azek Ahriman, which I have on many times referred to as Achek Ahriman, but whatever, was one of them. Born on Terra, like most of the coolest Marines, Ahriman and his brother Ormuzd, which is in fact a name, lived pretty decent lives growing up and were inducted into the initial Legion of the Thousand Sons. These men grew to be some of the more capable members, but the problem with the Thousand Sons and their entire shtick kind of manifested early on. You see, there is this thing called the flesh change. Don't know if you've heard of it. I know a lot of people refer to it as basically them exploding into chaos spawn, and outwardly that is exactly what it is. Personally, I like to think more it's just rampant mutation brought about by the radiations that psychic energies produce, which, I mean, I guess that might be just exactly what a chaos spawn is, but in my mind there is a distinction. Regardless, Ahriman lost his brother due to the flesh change, and at this kind of young age, it definitely scarred him more or less for life. He is very much the type to not let things go, if you couldn't fucking tell. At this point, the Emperor thought about putting the Thousand Sons down, but saw good in them, so he let them bear this change for as long as necessary until a cure could be found. Ahriman was kind of leading the charge to fix it, but never really found something until his his dad showed up. Magnus the Red showed up and blah blah blah, got tricked by Tzeentch, sacrificed an eye, and allegedly cured the flesh change, which he totally didn't. You know the song and dance at this point if you know anything about the Thousand Sons, and if you don't, well, I did cover Magnus in a Magnus dedicated video, so you should go watch that if you want to know specifically what happened. Now the reason why I'm not doing that is because this is an Ahriman video and how Ahriman developed. So Ahriman, now mostly freed up from researching the flesh change and how to fix it, decided to dedicate his life to being the best damn sorcerer in the Thousand Sons, which he damn well became outside of Magnus. He became one of the best in the universe, to be completely fair when it comes to being psychic, and not without a little deserved arrogance, I mind you. That being said, he was relatively level-headed as far as him and his stature would go. He was a noble soul, but I think what is one of the most common traits in the Sons of Magnus definitely manifested in him, and that is just being incredibly naive. He makes horrible friends, I should note, and it kind of goes to show that he's a little bit too trusting of anybody. So, for one, he served with the Wordbearers for a stint during the Great Crusade to learn their lore, their stories, their religion, so on and so forth. He in fact became good friends with one Erebus, which, well, I guess he could have been friends with Erebus, but there was no goddamn chance that Erebus was friends with him, because Erebus is the worst person and doesn't like really anyone. But regardless, he ended up also befriending a Space Wolf rune priest by the name of Othair Weirdmake, which would inevitably be the downfall of his entire legion, because he decided to share secrets that he totally shouldn't have with this rune priest, because this kind of would lead to the Council of Nikaea happening, which sucks. What do I mean? Well, while serving on campaign with Weirdmake, he would share the struggles of his brothers and speak psyker to psyker with the Space Wolf, seemingly forming a bit of a kinship with them over their shared plight of being psychically inclined in a universe that kind of hates that. But the thing you gotta remember about the Space Wolves as well, that is that they, of the hierarchy of their trust, starts and ends with the Emperor, with second place being Leman Russ, meaning if you are doing something the Emperor wouldn't approve of, they will not keep secrets unless Leman is involved, and even then, it really just depends on the situation. Regardless, because of this, it ended with the rampant overuse of psychic powers being reported to the Emperor and basically causing the Council of Nikaea to judge the Thousand Sons and Magnus of their crimes. But we did kind of skip things here. We're going a little bit at a breakneck pace, so let's slow things down a bit. How bad really was it? Like, how bad truly was it to justify them literally being brought to court over it? Well, for one, I think it's important to categorize things into three groups: the good, the bad, and the unnecessary. All three categories see a lot of misuses, and I'll go over and explain that. And for two, some of these weigh a little bit more than others, and also Magnus was kind of a dick at his trial, so it ended up, a lot of the trial was spurred on by the attitude that the Thousand Sons had, which was intense arrogance and thinking that they were better than everyone else because they were Space Marines that were almost always psychically inclined. So let's get into those three categories. So for the good, this is the category of them using the psychic abilities to benefit the world around them in more or less an objectively good way. So for one, their homeworld, Prospero, had these psychic parasites called the Psychnuin, which I think is how you say that would burrow into the brains of people who were psychically gifted and lay eggs there to create more. They were basically just giant mosquitoes that really, really sucked. With the help of Magnus, they were removed. Alongside that, Prospero was able to prosper and become a utopia. Disease was no longer a thing you had to worry about there, and the reason being is they would basically circumvent the natural order of the universe to fix anything. Oh, this disease has no known cure because its cellular structure is so simplified that you can't really do much to it? Well, I'm just going to use psychic surgery to make sure that its cell walls rupture and its nucleus becomes inert so that your immune system can fight it off naturally. Got cancer? Okay, I'll just kill all the cancerous cells in your body. Broken bones? I'll mend them. You look ugly? Alright, well, we can fix that. It got to the point where most physical problems could be solved. These are are objectively good. Like, saving lives and extending human lifespans is incredibly important for the survival of humankind, as well as just a kindness you do for other individuals. Now, did they overuse it? You bet your ass they did, because they totally use that shit to solve colds and just sore throats. I would imagine. There's no real facts to prove this that I know of, but yeah. Alongside that, they would also use their psychic abilities to solve warfare-based problems. What do I mean? Well, you're not only fighting a space marine, you're fighting a space marine that can shoot lightning out of his palms and vaporize pretty much anybody in the area. This is good, but with how psychic abilities work, with the flaring of emotions causing them to become significantly more extreme, it could cause the usage or overusage on the battlefield to become significantly more of a danger, but we'll get into more of that later. This usage on the battlefield would resolve conflicts a lot quicker because, well, when you see a guy who's in about 10 tons of fantasy metals and ceramics carrying bolt guns that can shoot at you with psychic ammo that could cause you to die and then go to hell immediately, and they're also shooting lightning out of their palms, and some of them are just summoning giant birds made of fire because it's funny. Yeah, it's very disheartening. It would make battles end a lot quicker than you'd expect, because I mean, imagine fighting an entire army of Jedi in plate steel. It's just not really fun to think about, right? So with all that being covered, let's get into the bad and then the unnecessary. The bad is pretty obvious stuff, like say you have them using their psychic powers for manipulation. One of the big ones Magnus has kind of pulled in the past was he would seemingly manipulate the emotions and minds of those he was talking to in order to bring their worlds into compliance during the Great Crusade. This is actually kind of horrifying to me, I guess. See, for me, one of my biggest fears is actually having my perceptions and emotions manipulated by others, which is a very specific fear to have at the level of intensity that I do have. So, you know, the idea of psychically or just through being manipulated, yeah, I know, it's a bit of a weird fear. I guess I just read one too many Harlan Ellison stories back in the day. Regardless, that is one. Another one is the obvious one of them tampering with psychic powers a bit too much, looking for forbidden knowledge and then using their knowledge to absorb further knowledge that should likely have stayed forbidden. Now, this one only became retroactively horrible once you realize that, yeah, no, the superstitions of each planet they went to were probably founded upon logic that made a lot of sense, but they would always downplay everything as being enlightened men. Thus, they would desecrate these holy areas to these people and kind of destroy their culture in a sense. But even then, at minimum, it was just them bullying cultures into compliance just so that they can have their whims be scratched. There is a story of Magnus going through an entire burning sunstorm that was going to bake the entire ozone of a planet just so that he could go to a library to steal one book, and it ended up with the deaths of a bunch of his marines during some kind of insurrectionist forced uprising. But yeah, with that all being said, lastly, let's get to the weird and unnecessary shit that I think, honestly, it's kind of more offensive than the bad stuff, because like with the bad stuff, there was at least a justification behind it. It's the quickest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That's how they saw it. If psychic powers got the job done quick enough, it doesn't matter if morally speaking it's kind of fucked. But regardless, the unnecessary stuff is just them using their powers for stuff that they didn't really need to, such as reading books faster or getting rid of minor ailments like I mentioned before, which could easily just be fought out and take a sick day maybe. Using their powers to amplify the power sources of their generators on their backpacks for their power armor, even though you don't really need to do that. Having psychic bullets when bolt gun shells are just as effective. Powering automata that specifically only get powered through psychic abilities when we already have versions of that. Like, there's this automata that they would use. It's a version of a Castellax, and it was specifically for the Thousand Suns, and it was specifically controlled by another psyker when we already had cortico implants that could control automata that would be implanted into specific types of tech marines. It's adding extra layers just so that they could use their psychic abilities more, and sure, it could be marginally more efficient, but it was just unnecessary. You could just do it the same way, and I get it, it's their main gimmick, but them overusing their psychic abilities was kind of the crux of this whole argument, which they were. They were using it for entertainment as well, and to speedrun things, like I mentioned before. They were going through books as fast as possible, absorbing them psychically rather than reading them at pace. Now, some Marines would do that, but they would scan through things and take away the base knowledge, which I do think robs them of a certain aspect to the reading process. Like, for me, it's kind of become a ritual to read books physically. I know that reading digitally is is more efficient, but I'm going through Berserk right now, which, by the way, if you haven't read Berserk, read Berserk, but if you're like below the age of 18, one, you shouldn't be watching this video, but if you're above the age of 18, yeah, Berserk's a bit of its own thing. You should probably go in with viewer discretion in mind, but yeah, I don't read digitally where it should be easier. There isn't really any bookstore nearby where I can actually purchase the books. I have to order them from Amazon, which takes longer than it should for my rural area, but the physical process of opening the book, getting through it, and actually like reading it, I feel like it activates me more in terms of my neurons, and that's kind of what I feel would be better for the Thousand Sons. Sure, getting the knowledge is one thing, but I think respecting the process of actually reading the books is important. Maybe I'm just being pedantic and being hoity-toity on my high horse, but I don't know. I feel like more disciplined legions take the time to finish it. You know, the destination isn't the key aspect of a journey, it's the journey. I'm kind of standing on principle here, but yeah, I think half of the experience is just experiencing it. But regardless, with the Thousand Sons, they had an issue of cutting corners by using their psychic gifts as much as possible. Did it make it easier? Yes, but I still think you lose something just by cutting those excess portions off. Making a psychic demon to press the button rather than you doing it yourself, just, you know, it just sounds boring. It just sounds like they're cutting out necessary steps that make it more rewarding in the long term, I guess. So with all that being said, the Council of Nikaea happened, and Magnus was found guilty. Thousand Sons were censored for their neglect and overuse of psychic abilities, and told that they should not do that, and all the librarius in the various legions were being disbanded for the time being. So did the Thousand Sons slow down? God, no. They just assumed the Imperium would come around at some point. There is a lot that kind of happened in between then and now, but in general, the Thousand Sons did a lot of things they probably shouldn't have. Magnus destroyed the Webway project the Emperor was building. Ahriman experienced both twink death and ego death at the same time, which I've heard is not exactly a healthy mix. Eventually, we get to a few events that need to be stated to understand truly the depths of Ahriman's character, and that is the burning of Prospero and the rubric. The burning of Prospero is a huge topic, something that once I've completely finished my research into the various examples of what happened and what it led to, because I'm still not done the Horus Heresy, I want to cover this event at length. But I cannot stress how much that the burning of Prospero was a turning point in the event that is the Horus Heresy. See, the Istvan atrocities, like for Istvan 3 and Istvan 5, were their own events that were kind of the major offset turning points to indicate that there was a war going on, but something changed after the burning of Prospero. Things became bitter and mean. It's like when you look at World War I after the first couple years, there was just a certain turning point where there was absolutely nothing but malice between both sides. So the event is known for Magnus not fully understanding the error of his ways, but wishing to be punished. It was more performative than it was actually in the seek of penance. So he let the wolves burn his world to the ground, sacrificing billions, but in the end, not being able to commit to his own death and cowardly selling his soul to Tzeentch to save his life. Meanwhile, Ahriman and the other Thousand Sons had to pay for it, because they were not alerted to the plan and just had to fight as best they could. But this is when Tzeentch's plan kicked into action. The flesh change came back in full force, and the Thousand Sons across the battlefield, while fighting the Space Wolves, were exploding into meat monsters, which, although could be considered effective in a combat scenario, were not exactly a desirable outcome. This led to the destruction of the peaceful culture of Prospero, and led to the fall of the Thousand Sons. To say Ahriman became what he is now after this is the best way to describe his character. See, the build-up was there. He was a creative problem solver that had his main problem taken away. Hell, even had a vineyard where he would make some of the best wine in the Imperium. This was his solution to what he would do when this whole war malarkey was done. He solved problems wherever he could go, but outside of that, he wanted to fix the flesh change. And he never really got a chance to because Magnus did. So with the flesh change happening, he decided to steal one of the books Magnus said no one could ever use or see, and he enacted this ritual. This was the rubric, and it kind of worked. He basically cured the flesh change and replaced it with something that is arguably worse. See, in the Thousand Sons, not all of his brothers were what you would consider psychic, but all of them were at minimum psychically sensitive. The rubric essentially took the most powerful, capable, and stable psychers in the Legion, funneled the unstable powers of the warp from the other brothers that were not into them, and it turned the least stable, least powerful, and least psychic of them into dust automatons. Their souls, or at least the withered husks that you could call a soul, were still clinging to their armor, having their psychic abilities mostly stripped out of them, and the remaining sorcerers that had survived the rubric ritual became more powerful as a result. Ahriman was fucking destroyed. There is a difference between survival and living. Sure, the remaining battle brothers would never be affected by the flesh change again, but they would never truly live as a man should live. They were barely thinking, obsessive, and could barely communicate anything above basic responses. They were 100% under the command of the now supercharged chaos sorcerers of the Thousand Suns. They made them an effective fighting force, which to some was awesome. They had little golems that they could control and fire bolters from, like giant action figures you could control with your thoughts. But to people who weren't stark raving mad, you had Ahriman reacted, which was, to say the phrase absolutely devastated is a bit of an understatement. He vowed to find a way to reverse the rubric, cure the flesh change, and bring his brothers back. There were some shenanigans along the way, like him killing Magnus's foster dad, Amon, and stealing his warband for his own, as well as collecting a bunch of equipment, spaceships, and other members of the Thousand Sons and bringing them into his fold under the same purpose. This is what collectively turned into what would eventually become the Prodigal Sons, Ahriman's warband. And they are a warband whose goal and intentions are not immediately evil or even really that bad, but along the way you see how ruthless they are at trying to accomplish their goal. They will scour worlds, kill trillions, and do some pretty horrid chaos rituals if it means getting closer to their goal. Ahriman actually made enemies with more or less every Eldar faction out there due to him wanting to break into the Black Library, which is kind of a big no-no, as this is the domain of one of the last Eldar gods out there, and also the stronghold of one of the objectively strongest factions in the game, at least conceptually, the Harlequins. He, if memory serves me correctly, broke into the library for a grand total of like 50 seconds, ended up stealing a kind of important book about how to break into the Eldar webway, and then just sort of fucked off back to where he came before Kegarak could really rip him to shreds. This has kind of made him a target for basically all the Harlequins out there, as well as most of the other Eldar. No one really messes with the funny clowns and lives, if you catch my drift. Speaking of, in the most recent iterations of his lore, he was part of a plan to scour and fuck with the Space Wolves, because Marines don't really seem to ever let things go, and it kind of worked, I guess, bringing the planet of the Sorcerers into real space, which is the home base of the Thousand Sons, if you didn't know. Though Fenris is a little bit shittier than it usually is because of this invasion, it's doing okay at the moment, last I checked. The big funny one that happened was he decided to make an enemy out of a pretty recently formed branch of the Eldar, the Ynnari, which are the remnants of a bunch of different factions of Eldar that were birthed from the destruction of Bealtan's craft world. It's complicated. I'll cover the Ynnari when the Eldar become popular, which I guess means never, but whatever, it's besides the point. So this situation is kind of one of the few Ynnari W's in the history of the setting, where out of what I assume is just spite, malice, and sufficient annoyance, Yvraine, the leader of the Ynnari, or at least one of the three, just casually reversed the rubric on a few of the Marines mid-combat, much to everyone's confusion, especially the rubric Marines who just suddenly came back online as far as sentience goes for the first time in 10,000 years. This ended with them almost immediately dying, causing Ahriman to not only go into a bout of existential dread, but also pure rage at the Ynnari, as they prove that you could in fact reverse the rubric, but it requires magic so esoteric that even he doesn't have much of a chance of understanding it at current times. But that's kind of the last update we have on him lore-wise to my research. I do feel like I missed out on a few things, but this is mostly just an idea to understand who Ahriman is. He's a person dedicated to the salvation of his brothers, and he has kind of this one-minded determination to get this job done. Now, I'm going to kind of cut away from my research and give my opinion on Ahriman, which is, it's an opinion, and that is that I just don't care. No, for real, I just genuinely do not care. I can gas him and his warband up as much as possible, tell you the lore, give you his feats, his warband's accomplishments, talk about everything. I could possibly involving him, and to be 100% with you, I just do not care for the life of me. I do not know what it is with me and Tzeentch, but me and him, have such an unhealthy relationship with each other. I find most factions that worship Tzeentch, or at least related to them, are literally the most hit or miss shit in the setting. No joke, I genuinely either love them in concept and execution for no discernible reason, or I think they are so bland and boring that I just can't grow attached to them. The Scourged, a warband of Tzeentch cursed Marines that can always tell when someone's telling the truth or a lie, based. Horrors of Tzeentch, both pink, blue, and incandescent, based. Lords of Change, cringe. Zangors, I sleep. And for some reason, the Prodigal Sons and Ezek Ahriman, I feel nothing. I do not feel any level of compulsion to enjoy their story in the slightest. I just feel it so dull. Like, I can recognize that they are pretty cool and have some fun elements to them, like that time that Ahriman, pre-Tzeentch, stopped a crashing starship with nothing but his psychic might, albeit with a little bit of help from his brothers, but it was pretty damn cool. Reminded me of that one scene from The Force Unleashed. If you know, you know. But whenever I think about the Prodigal Sons and Ahriman, you know what kind of aura this gives? The same aura as the fucking Grey Knights. I don't know why, but the Grey Knights occupy a blank in my brain, where if ever they show up, I feel no joy, I feel no sorrow. I just recognize that there are going to be a lot of dead Grey Knights soon to power scale some big bad chaos guy. Same goes to the Thousand Sons. I think they are just such a lame threat. It's one of the reasons why I switched off about halfway through Space Marine 2 and I just couldn't really find the motivation to finish the game. I think a good reason as to why is that with the Horus Heresy, it is retroactively trying to make the lore of modern 40k get a bit of a refresh. So what do I mean? I mean that you have the Chaos cults and you have the Chaos Legions and you have all the factions that are said to have existed because of the heresy. And that's cool, but those factions existed before the Horus Heresy was written above game, and the Horus Heresy was written as a means to give an explanation of the damnation, that rhymed, whatever, of those specific Marine legions. Some of it makes sense, like with the Death Guard, they were stinky and kind of sucked from the beginning. With the World Eaters, well, the Butcher's Nails, they did that. But with the Thousand Sons, they are literally just pretty cool wizards. It became a plot point that in order for Magnus as an evil demon to be considered possible, they had to literally remove the goodness from him in canon. I mean, he literally had his kindness and compassion removed and merged with another Thousand Son that was frozen mid-flesh change, and the dude that popped out ended up, weirdly enough, becoming the guy that started the Grey Knights. Full circle. Weird. But regardless, it just seems like such a mismatch where you're trying to relate to these evil space wizards, but they're just too powerful. They are too powerful, yet somehow almost never get anything done. I'm certain, one for one, the Lamenters have more grand victories than that of the goddamn Thousand Sons in the modern 40k setting. Do I have the wins versus losses statistics to back that up? No, I'm making a bold-faced claim and hoping no one calls me on it, but I have a feeling that most of you kind of feel the same way. And not to be that power-scaling comparison-based guy, but if, say, the Prodigal Sons and the Lamenters were paired off for a fight, who do you think is going to decimate the other? Say what you want about Malakim Foros and his skills as the chapter master, I'm pretty sure Ahriman and his thousands of Marines will probably win. They are just such a dull faction because nothing really happens. Even when things happen, nothing really happens. Hell, Vashdor the Archiphane, that chaos demigod that was important for a total of 5 minutes, he basically accomplished a more impressive version of summoning the planet of the sorcerers all by himself. Wormwood was weird, and he's only been canon for maybe a few years at most. I suppose I'm just bored and frustrated with them, with him, with Ahriman. I think there would be more hype behind these individuals if there was more of an understanding of his psychology. Maybe I just don't see the vision, and his relationship with his Primarch is actually interesting. But it isn't the most interesting of the heralds from what I see. Hell, I find Lucius the Eternal more entertaining, and that stain on the face of the earth has troubles not making me spasm whenever he's brought up in conversation casually. Perhaps I'm just being me, a bit too harsh. Perhaps I'm letting my biases take hold when they shouldn't, but that is me. What do you all think? Am I wrong? In your eyes, probably. I just find the Thousand Sons are just kind of dull. Some of them I like, but, you know. I think Ahriman of all the heralds is the least interesting, but if you have a reason as to why he is more interesting than I think, let me know in the comments. It wouldn't be the first time that my opinion has been swayed by you, and I also want to see your guys' opinion. Also, remember to obviously like and subscribe, and special thanks to my channel members for supporting me. And if you want to support me as well as support my content, then become a channel member today. It helps me grow my channel and produce this content for you regularly. If you become a channel member, you gain access to a bunch of neat little perks. Nothing too fantastic, but they range from you seeing the video the second that it's uploaded and available rather than waiting for the release schedule, all the way up to you getting 2 extra videos a month at the highest tier. Thank you all for watching, and I promise I'm not backsliding. I forgave Magnus for everything, I think.